The thin mountain air of Fort Crimson bit at Major Catherine Kate Blackwood's lungs as her finger settled on the trigger. 2,000 meters across the Afghan valley, her target, a shadowy figure known only as Ghost, moved between structures. Through her scope, she could see his breath in the cold air. A formidable adversary who had claimed the lives of 12 Allied operators. Kate controlled her breathing, 3 heartbeats per minute, a technique she'd perfected over decades. The crosshairs steadied, the distance between life and death measured in millimeters. Ghost paused, as if sensing something. He turned slowly, scanning the ridgeline where Kate lay concealed. For a brief, chilling moment, it seemed he was looking directly at her, though that was impossible at this range. Kate squeezed the trigger. The crack of the shot echoed across the valley, but by the time the sound reached her target, the bullet had already traveled its deadly path. Through her scope, she saw Ghost collapse. Then darkness. 23 years later, the unforgiving Arizona sun beat down on Fort Crimson's landing pad as the UH-60 Blackhawks rotors slowed. Major Catherine Blackwood, now 57, stepped onto the tarmac, her weathered face impassive. The years had etched deep lines around her eyes, not from age alone but from squinting through scopes in deserts, mountains, and jungles across 4 continents. In her right hand, she carried a hardened rifle case, long and slender. It wasn't standard issue. That much was obvious from its worn appearance. The 2 duffel bags at her feet contained the sum of her worldly possessions deemed necessary for this assignment. Her final posting before retirement. Major Blackwood, a young sergeant approached, clipboard in hand, sunglasses concealing eyes already weary of her presence. Sergeant Michael Davis, I've been assigned to escort you to your quarters and brief you on your administrative duties. Administrative duties, Kate repeated, the words tasting bitter. After 30 years of service, most of which remained classified, she'd been relegated to counting bullets and filing requisition forms. The Pentagon's idea of a pre-retirement sinecure. As they walked across the base, Kate noted the young operators pausing in their activities, eyeing her with cursory glances before returning to their tasks with suppressed smirks. Their attention lingered longest on her rifle case, the case that held a weapon most of these men had only seen in museums or history books. Your quarters are this way, ma'am. Davis hesitated, leading her away from the main barracks toward a small, isolated container. The physical manifestation of her peripheral status couldn't have been clearer. Inside her quarters, Kate placed the rifle case reverently on the narrow bed. She unlocked it, revealing a weapon that would have immediately stood out to any firearms enthusiast. An SVD-63 Dragunov, a Soviet-designed marksman rifle that had seen its heyday during the Cold War. But this wasn't a museum piece. The original wooden furniture had been replaced with a modern adjustable stock. The barrel was free-floated, and the scope mounted on it was a piece of German glass worth more than most men's yearly salary. It was a classic chassis built out with cutting-edge components, a perfect metaphor for the woman who owned it. Kate ran her fingers along the receiver, memories flooding back. Not of battles or kills, but of a different time. Of an old man with steel-gray eyes and hands steady as bedrock, teaching a young CIA operative the art of patience. The mountain speaks, Ivan Petrov had told her. You must only learn to listen. Petrov, former KGB Spetsnaz sniper, had defected during the height of the Cold War, bringing with him techniques that had revolutionized American long-range marksmanship. Operation Phantom, a black program so classified that fewer than 12 people knew of its existence, had paired Petrov with promising American operators. Kate had been his most gifted student. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. Davis stood outside, visibly uncomfortable. Major, Colonel Freeman requests your presence at the command center, immediately. The Tactical Operations Center hummed with the energy of a beehive. Screens displayed satellite imagery, weather patterns, and topographic maps. At the center stood Colonel William Freeman, 62, his salt and pepper hair cropped military short, his posture ramrod straight, despite 3 decades of field operations. Catherine, he said, the familiar use of her name raising eyebrows among the assembled officers. Welcome to Fort Crimson. Bill, she nodded, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. They had history, Afghanistan, Iraq, operations without names in countries America officially never entered. The door to the TOC opened, and a tall, broad-shouldered man entered. The atmosphere shifted immediately, younger officers straightening, conversations dying mid-sentence. Master Sergeant James Carter, Freeman introduced, commander of Alpha Team, our premier sniper unit. Carter was the physical embodiment of the modern American operator, fit, confident, and carrying the subtle arrogance that came from being the best at a deadly profession. 34 years old with 8 deployments and 32 confirmed kills. His eyes flicked to Kate's insignia, then to her face, taking measure. The administrative officer finally arrived. His voice carried the barest hint of dismissal. I was beginning to think you were a Pentagon myth. Kate met his gaze evenly. Just here to count bullets and file reports, Master Sergeant. Carter's eyes narrowed slightly. Good to know where we stand. This is a high-tempo facility with cutting-edge equipment. My men use integrated ballistic computers, laser rangefinders that talk to their scopes, and rifles that cost more than your annual pension. He gestured toward the firing range visible through the window. We don't have time for personnel who aren't field current. Freeman cleared his throat, ending the confrontation before it truly began. Major Blackwood will be overseeing logistics for the next operation. Speaking of which, he turned to the main display, which showed a rugged canyon system. Gentlemen, meet the Diablo Ravine, and meet our target. The screen changed to show a grainy photograph of a bearded man with cold, calculating eyes. Nikolai Volkov, codenamed Scorpion, former KGB, now running the largest arms smuggling operation in the Southwest. Intelligence indicates he'll be at this compound for the next 72 hours. Kate felt her blood freeze. The name Volkov struck like a physical blow. Not just because of the surname, no relation to her mentor as far as she knew, but because of the face. Older now, beard grayer, but unmistakable. Ghost. The man she'd shot in Afghanistan. The man who should be dead. Freeman continued, seemingly oblivious to Kate's reaction. This is a precision strike mission. Extreme distance, complex environment. Alpha Team will deploy at 0500 tomorrow. Carter nodded confidently. We'll get it done, sir. Dismissed, Freeman ordered, and the officers filed out. Major Blackwood, a word. When they were alone, Freeman's formal demeanor softened. It's good to see you, Kate. You knew, she said quietly. About Volkov, about Ghost. Freeman's eyes betrayed nothing. I needed the best for this mission. Carter's team is good, the best we currently have, but they've never faced someone like Scorpion. I shot him, Bill. Center Mass, Afghanistan 2002. He should be dead. And yet, Kate turned to the display, studying the canyon. The Diablo Ravine is a natural wind tunnel. Carter's team will be shooting in conditions that defy conventional calculation. That's what their advanced equipment is for. Kate shook her head. No computer can account for the microcurrents and thermal shifts in that environment. They'll miss. Freeman studied her for a long moment. Then what would you suggest? Before she could answer, the door opened again. Davis entered, looking uncomfortable. Excuse me, Colonel. Master Sergeant Carter is requesting the ammunition requisition for tomorrow's operation. Freeman nodded. Major Blackwood will handle it. That's all, Sergeant. As Kate followed Davis out, Freeman called after her. Remember why you're here, Kate? The question was, did she really know why she was here at all? Kate spent the afternoon in the ammunition depot, meticulously checking each round that would go into Carter's magazines. The match-grade ammunition was hand-loaded by the military's most skilled ballistic technicians. Each round a masterpiece of precision manufacturing. Humidity rose 12% overnight, she commented to Davis, who watched her with growing curiosity. These rounds need to acclimate before loading. I'll make sure to tell Master Sergeant Carter, Davis replied, his earlier dismissiveness giving way to attentiveness. Kate examined a round, holding it to the light. The powder temperature affects the initial velocity. Chamber your round at least 30 minutes before the shot. Let it reach thermal equilibrium with your rifle. Davis stared at her. That's not in any of our manuals. Some things aren't in manuals, Sergeant. Kate continued her inventory. The mountain speaks. You just need to learn how to listen. The mountain speaks? Davis repeated, confused. Kate smiled faintly. An old Russian once told me that. Later that evening, Kate slipped away from the base, driving a borrowed Humvee into the desert. 20 miles from Fort Crimson, she turned onto a dirt track that wound into the foothills. The modest cabin at the end of the road looked like it had stood there since frontier days. She knocked 3 times, paused, then twice more. The door opened to reveal a man who seemed as ancient as the mountains themselves. At 95, Ivan Petrov's body had withered, but his steel-gray eyes remained sharp as ever. "Catherine," he greeted, his Russian accent still thick despite decades in America. "It has been too long." Inside, the cabin was Spartan but comfortable. On the walls hung photographs, black and white images of younger versions of both of them. Berlin, Prague, Moscow. "You know why I'm here," Kate said. Petrov nodded solemnly. "Nikolai Volkov, Scorpion." He spat the name like poison. "My greatest failure. You trained him? Before you. Before I defected." Petrov moved to a weathered chest in the corner. He was brilliantly gifted, a natural talent I had never seen before. He opened the chest, removing a small wooden box. "Until you. I shot him in Afghanistan. He should be dead." Petrov shrugged. "The best of us are hard to kill." He opened the box, revealing a single bullet nestled in velvet. It gleamed dully in the lamplight, its brass casing etched with the insignia of the KGB. "This is for you. For Scorpion." "What is it?" "The last of its kind, hand-loaded by me in 1989. The powder mixture is my own creation, stable in any temperature, consistent in any environment." He closed Kate's fingers around the bullet. To close the circle. As Kate drove back to base, the bullet heavy in her pocket, she pondered Petrov's final words to her. "The Americans trust their machines. Nikolai trusts only what I taught him. You must remember everything I taught you, Catherine, the old ways. The ways of listening to the mountain." At 0500, Alpha Team deployed. 6 men, each carrying equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Their rifles, Barrett MRAD systems chambered in 338 Lapua Magnum, represented the pinnacle of modern precision engineering. Their scopes featured integrated ballistic calculators. Their weather meters captured data that would have required an entire meteorological station just a decade ago. Kate watched from the tuck as their helicopters disappeared into the dawn sky. Beside her, Freeman studied satellite imagery of the target area. "The storm front is accelerating," an intelligence officer reported. "Estimated window for the operation now 6 hours before conditions deteriorate beyond operational parameters." On the main screen, drone footage showed Alpha Team establishing their hide, a concealed shooting position on a ridgeline with a clear line of sight to Scorpion's compound 1,800 meters away. They were professionals, invisible once they settled into position. Hours passed. The atmosphere in the TOC grew tense as meteorological conditions worsened. "Alpha reports difficulty establishing stable firing solution," the communications officer announced. Kestrel readings showing significant variability. Kate moved closer to the weather display, studying the complex patterns developing across the canyon. The approaching storm was creating a massive pressure differential, forcing air through the narrow passages like water through a twisted pipe. "Contact!" came Carter's voice over the speakers. "Target identified. Scorpion emerging from main structure." The thermal image zoomed in on a figure exiting the largest building, surrounded by guards. "Alpha, you are cleared to engage," Freeman ordered. On the screen, the crosshairs of Carter's scope settled on the target. Seconds ticked by as the ballistic computer processed the environmental data, calculating the complex adjustments needed. "Solution unstable," Carter reported, frustration edging into his voice. "Wind data inconsistent. Recalculating." Freeman leaned forward. "Alpha, time window is closing. Target is moving toward a vehicle. Taking the shot." The thermal image showed the crosshairs shift slightly as Carter made a final adjustment. Then stillness as he controlled his breathing, his heartbeat. Every muscle focused on the perfect trigger squeeze. The shot cracked across the canyon. Through the thermal image, they watched the bullet's path, a momentary distortion in the air, tracking toward Scorpion. A miss. The round impacted the wall 2 feet to the right of Scorpion. The compound erupted into chaos. Guards scrambled, pulling their principal toward a hardened structure deeper within the complex. Missed, Carter reported, his voice tight with controlled fury. Target is moving to cover. Wind shift at terminal phase pushed the round off course. Calculating was substantially different from actual conditions. Alpha, extract immediately, Freeman ordered. Storm is intensifying. The TOC erupted into controlled chaos. In the corner, Kate stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the meteorological display. She had seen exactly what happened, how the complex wind patterns had created a condition no technology could accurately predict. Freeman approached, his face grim. A word. In his office, he didn't mince words. You were right, Kate nodded. The corkscrew effect. The wind at the firing position was substantially different from conditions at mid-range and at the target. No single measurement could capture that complexity. Freeman ran a hand over his face. This was our one shot at Scorpion. By the time the storm clears, he'll be gone. Kate said nothing, her silence acknowledgement of the gravity of the situation. Freeman studied her for a long moment. In Kandahar, you made a shot under similar conditions. Crosswind, varying between 4 environmental zones. Moving target, 2,400 meters. Different time, different war. The physics hasn't changed. Freeman turned away. Alpha Team will reach the extraction point in approximately 90 minutes. The TOC will continue monitoring in case Scorpion re-emerges before the storm hits full force. He glanced back at her, his meaning clear without words. You're dismissed, Major. Kate left the office, moving through the TOC without drawing attention. No one noticed as she walked not toward the supply depot, but toward her quarters. Outside, the wind was rising, carrying the scent of rain and disturbed earth. The storm was coming. And with it, perhaps, a chance for redemption. The mood in the TOC had deteriorated from professional disappointment to grim resignation. Alpha Team had reached the extraction point safely, but the mission was a failure. Scorpion remained secure in his fortified compound, and the approaching storm had made any follow-up operation impossible. Carter had returned, his face a mask of controlled fury as he analyzed the meteorological data that had betrayed him. The wind values were impossible, he insisted to Freeman. We had 3 different instruments giving contradictory readings. Sir, the communications officer interrupted, we have movement at the target compound. Scorpion has emerged from the bunker. All eyes snapped to the main display. The thermal image showed a figure matching Scorpion's profile stepping into the courtyard, surrounded by guards. He thinks we've withdrawn completely, Freeman murmured. Permission to redeploy immediately, Carter requested, already calculating time and distance. Impossible, Freeman cut him off. The storm front is less than 2 hours out. The TOC fell into tense silence as they watched Scorpion move confidently through his compound, believing himself safe. Then, a voice on the radio, a voice that wasn't part of Alpha Team or any other designated field unit. Crimson TOC? This is Sierra Actual. I have eyes on target. The communications officer looked up in confusion. Sir, we have an unidentified transmission on the secure channel. Freeman's head snapped around. Put it through. Sierra Actual, this is Crimson Base. Identify yourself and your position. This is Sierra Actual, the calm, measured voice replied. I'm in position on heading 307, elevation 5,140 feet, approximately 2,100 meters from target compound. I have positive visual on Scorpion and a clear firing solution. Carter stepped forward, incredulous. That's impossible. We have no teams deployed in that sector. Freeman said nothing, his eyes fixed on the drone feed that was now scanning the ridgeline. For several tense seconds, the thermal imaging showed nothing but rock and scrub brush. Then, almost imperceptibly, a faint heat signature appeared. A single human form prone on a rocky outcropping. "I'll be damned," the drone operator whispered. Carter grabbed a microphone. "Sierra Actual, identify yourself immediately." "Master Sergeant Carter, this is Major Blackwood. I believe I can make this shot." The talk erupted into shocked exclamations. Carter's face contorted in disbelief. "The administrative officer?" Freeman silenced the room with a raised hand. "Major Blackwood, explain your capability." "The storm front is creating a pressure differential across the canyon." Kate's voice remained steady, professional. "Primary wind at my position is 15 knots from the west, shifting to 22 knots at mid-range with vertical displacement. Terminal phase will experience a 3-second counter-rotation as the air mass compresses against the eastern wall." Her detailed analysis silenced even Carter. It was the assessment of someone with profound understanding of environmental ballistics. "Sir," Carter protested, "even if she somehow has the training, the equipment she's using is completely inadequate for these conditions." "What is your confidence level?" Freeman interrupted. 87%, Colonel," Kate replied. "The shot is within parameters." Freeman made his decision. "Sierra Actual, you are cleared to engage when ready." The entire TOC held its collective breath as they watched the thermal image of the lone figure on the ridge make minute adjustments to her position. "Target is moving," Kate reported. "Wind showing pattern of 3 strong gusts followed by 3-second lull. I will fire during the lull." On the main screen, Scorpion continued to move through the compound, unaware of the invisible thread of fate connecting him to the distant ridgeline. "First gust passing, second gust, now third." Kate's voice was almost meditative in its calmness. Firing. The drone's thermal imaging showed her body still as stone, only the slightest movement as she controlled her breathing. Then, the barely perceptible recoil of the rifle. A split second of flight time, then Scorpion collapsed where he stood. His guards reacted in confusion, unable to determine the source of the attack as they dragged their fallen leader toward cover. "Target down," Kate reported dispassionately. "Confirmed hit center mass. Initiating extraction to Rally Point Bravo." The talk remained frozen in stunned silence before erupting into controlled chaos. Confirmation of the kill came quickly from image analysis. Carter stood motionless, his face unreadable as he processed what he had just witnessed. Freeman moved to his side, speaking quietly. "Assemble a quick reaction team to extract the Major. Full tactical support." As Carter moved to organize the extraction, Freeman allowed himself a small, private smile. The ghost had emerged from the shadows, revealing a truth that had been hidden in plain sight all along. The atmosphere at Fort Crimson underwent a seismic shift. The whispers that had once dismissed Kate Blackwood were now charged with a mixture of confusion, respect, and wary speculation. The story of the impossible shot spread through the base like wildfire. Kate herself remained unchanged, performing her administrative duties with the same quiet efficiency as before. But the world around her had transformed. The younger soldiers no longer passed her with dismissive glances. Instead, they straightened subtly when she approached, their conversations dropping to respectful murmurs. Davis found her in the supply depot, the morning after the mission, meticulously updating inventory records as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. "Major," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed." Kate looked up from her paperwork, her expression neutral. "Thank you, Sergeant, but there's nothing to be gained by dwelling on it." "With respect, ma'am. Why didn't you tell anyone about your skills? You let them treat you like..." "Like what? An administrative officer?" Kate set down her pen. "That was my assigned role." "But you're so much more than that." A faint smile touched Kate's lips. "Sometimes the most important lessons aren't taught on ranges or in classrooms, Sergeant. Sometimes they're learned by watching someone endure underestimation with dignity." Their conversation was interrupted as the depot door opened, revealing Carter. His expression was guarded, his body language stiff with unresolved tension. "Major Blackwood," he said formally, "Colonel Freeman requests your presence in the talk and..." He hesitated. "I owe you an apology." Kate studied him for a moment. "No apology needed, Master Sergeant. You care about your men and your mission. That's commendable. Carter shook his head. I made assumptions based on incomplete information. That's not commendable. It's sloppy tradecraft. He straightened. I've reviewed the drone footage 43 times. I've analyzed the meteorological data. By every measure of modern sniper doctrine, that shot was impossible. Not impossible, Kate corrected gently. Just forgotten. In the talk, Freeman waited with several senior officers. On the main display was a detailed proposal. Project Legacy. Major Blackwood, Freeman began formally. In light of recent events, I'm proposing a new training initiative, the integration of traditional environmental reading techniques with modern technology. He gestured to the screen. With you as the lead instructor. Kate's eyes moved over the document. You planned this from the beginning, Freeman nodded. The Pentagon recognizes that we've become over-reliant on technology. Recent operations have exposed vulnerabilities when electronic systems are degraded or environmental conditions exceed computational parameters. And Scorpion? Was he part of your plan too? Freeman's expression sobered. No, his presence was an unfortunate coincidence, but it provided the perfect test case. Kate considered the proposal. I'll need an assistant. Anyone you want. Sergeant Davis. And I want Carter's team as the first test subjects. Freeman smiled. Already arranged. 2 weeks later, on the Eastern Training Ground, Carter and his Alpha team sat in a semicircle around Kate, their usual high-tech gear conspicuously absent. Instead, each man held a small notebook and pencil. The first and most fundamental principle, Kate was saying, is that the environment is not an obstacle to overcome with technology. It's an information system that can be read directly by trained human senses. Carter raised his hand. With respect, Major, how can human senses possibly be as accurate as calibrated instruments? A Kestrel weather meter gives us precise measurements of wind speed, temperature, humidity, and pressure. At a single point in space, Kate nodded, but a bullet travels through thousands of points, each with potentially different conditions. She gestured toward the canyon that stretched before them. Your instruments sample data. Your senses can integrate it. She demonstrated by picking up a pinch of fine dust and releasing it into the air, watching its behavior carefully. This dust isn't just telling me the wind direction at my position. Its movement reveals microturbulence patterns, vertical displacement, and even relative humidity based on how the particles interact. Davis, now promoted to lieutenant, watched from nearby, recording the session. The transformation of Fort Crimson's training philosophy wasn't happening overnight, but it was happening. Kate's curriculum balanced traditional skills with modern technology, showing how to enhance technological effectiveness with fundamental environmental reading techniques. Technology amplifies human capability, she often repeated, but it cannot replace human judgment. 6 months later, Kate stood on the familiar ridge where she had made the impossible shot that changed everything. Beside her, Davis surveyed the canyon through binoculars. The first candidates for the advanced course arrive next week, he reminded her. 8 operators from 4 different special mission units. Kate nodded, her expression thoughtful. They'll bring established habits and assumptions. Breaking those down will be our first challenge. As the sun began its descent toward the western ridges, Kate took a moment to absorb the scene before her. Fort Crimson had become more than a training facility. It was now the incubator for an approach to special operations that bridged past and future, tradition, and innovation. Later that evening, Kate drove once more to the isolated cabin in the foothills. This time, she carried a small wooden box. Inside was a spent brass casing, the remnant of Petrov's special bullet, now inscribed with a new date. The old Russian sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "It is done?" he asked as Kate approached. She placed the box in his gnarled hands. "The circle is closed." Petrov opened the box, nodding with satisfaction at what he saw. "And now you teach others to listen to the mountain." "I do." "Good." He closed the box carefully. The modern world moves too fast. They trust their machines, their computers. They forget that before all this, he gestured vaguely toward the distant base. There was only the human and the mountain. And the mountain always speaks the truth. Kate watched the last light fade from the sky, thinking of all that had led her to this point. The young CIA operative learning from a KGB defector, the countless missions across decades of service. The final shot that had closed a circle begun in the Cold War. "What do you hear now?" Petrov asked softly. Kate closed her eyes, feeling the subtle shift in the air, the whisper of wind through the canyon, the temperature dropping as night approached. "Change," she answered. "I hear change coming." Petrov nodded, satisfied. "Then you are still listening." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "And now, others will learn to listen too." In the growing darkness, two generations of ghostmakers sat in companionable silence, listening to the eternal voice of the mountain as it spoke its ancient, unchanging truth to those with ears to hear.